And I can turn it on. Okay, let's do one. There. All right. Good. So I'd like to welcome everyone to the Everson, and I'd like to welcome our visitors online. So we're streaming this, and we have a bunch of visitors online as well. Welcome to the Visiting Artist Lecture, Syracuse, and the Everson Museum of Art. I'm Garth Johnson. I'm Sharon Sullivan, Curator of Ceramics here at the Everson. And the museum is full with amazing shows. And I regret that Raymon's show is not open to the public until tomorrow. So come back to the museum, see his show. And we're going to be telling you all about his work, all about his life. There's an artist named Rebecca Hutchinson from Massachusetts. Her exhibition opened last week and will have its official opening tomorrow. He's going to be doing a gallery talk on Saturday morning at 11 o'clock. So come join us at the gallery talk at 11. It's also City Market, so come see us from 10 until 3 on Sunday. I'd also like to invite everybody to our Family Day, which is coming up on October 15th. And we're going to have all manner of activities. Syracuse Ballet, Syracuse Opera, and we are bringing in an incredible hip hop troupe from LA who are going to be teaching and interacting with students and doing shows in our auditorium on this very stage all throughout that week. So sign up for our updates if you haven't done so, and join us for the many, many activities that we have in store. So it's my pleasure. I'm going to sit down and introduce everybody to our guest, Raymon Elozua. Yeah, get my clapping going on. So, ladies and gentlemen. So you want to? Oh, is this? This is where the hot sweet spot is. So you gotta.
Okay. Well, the first thing I want to thank the Everson Museum for putting on a show of my work, and that's due to the efforts of, first of all, the director, Elozua, and certainly Garth, who was crazy enough to fire on my work. And the entire staff here has been really remarkable and working hard to put the show up. So I'm a little disappointed that you can't see the show tonight, but I would recommend coming back to see the show, hopefully at your convenience.
Indeed, and it will be up through the end of 2022. And so Raymond decided, so you're not to stand behind a lectern, speechify, so you were a little sit down. Amazing. Finally, Jeremy and the Visiting Artist Lecture Series were wanting to put together an entire Visiting Artist Lecture Series, the idea of blue collar artists. And immediately I was so excited that, Raymond and I both kind of share that we come from a blue collar background. The more that I look into your work, the more that I sort of read into it, your own upbringing. Can you just tell us a little bit about your family, your upbringing, and the reason why I might think that blue collar is like a good way to describe you?
I mean, first of all, both my parents were immigrants. My father came to this country as an illegal immigrant, and he enlisted in the U.S. Army and served 25 years. He served through World War II and the Korean War. When he mustered out, he started working for U.S. Steel. My mother was a French war bride, meaning a French citizen that married an American and came over here as my father. So as immigrants, they had no family, they had no connection. They didn't know the language, they didn't know the rules, they didn't know the culture. So they had to work, very, very hard to find and make a place for themselves. So if I ascribe any value I have, it's to my parents who taught me the value. And, especially work that you want to do, which is what I learned later. We grew up on the south side of Chicago because U.S. Steel was on the south side of Chicago. But the south side of Chicago also had Republic Steel, it had General Motors, it had Ford, it had General Mills, it had Coke plants. You would wash your car and then a half hour later, it was covered in soot. So, it was just something that you didn't think about. There was no EPA or environmental standards at the time. I went to a boys' school, which was, really cool. Most of the go to college ultimately. They, went into the factory system working because you could make $15 an hour, which is probably the equivalent of $50 an hour now. And that I went to a school, my parents, but I start to say the only reason I'm on the stage is because I'm a failure at throwing on the wheel. And that's what really started my career, the inability to master the art of throwing. And Garth will have a slide and we can explain that later. But, and then in turn, I had to work to go to college. So one of the summers, my father got me a job in the tin mill at Inland Steel. And that was really an eye-opening experience because, the scale of the steel mill, you're in buildings that are 6, 7 stories high, open, hot. The water that you drank was salted because you were sweating so much. And it left an impact in my mind that came out later on when I decided to document the end of the steel industry. So that doesn't answer your question, but
No, it starts to give us. And one of the things that I wanted to point out for everyone who's listening is that, Raymon, with your work, from the beginning, there's usually been some sort of body of research or a conceptual thing that gives you the permission to make the thing that you make. And so this is just for everyone in the audience. I'd like you, as we kind of progress through the work that Raymon's done over the years, I'd like you to think about those things that kind of give Raymond the permission to make. And you progress to a point now where necessarily need all of those underpinnings, but to just alert everyone to the nature of how this is going to unfold.
well, I think Garth has a point. When I went to school in college to become a lawyer, though I was a good student in high school, when I went to University of Chicago, I was overwhelmed by the East Coast students, West Coast students who had mastered all the subject material that we were taking in our first year of college. So essentially, I'm even, which my mother could not believe, but that was the case. So I was, about to be kicked out of school. Here I took class to take class. One was a theater class. One was an American history class. Now, different bases. One was Manhattan, Kansas, Fort Riley. He brought me back a model railroad set. Fantasy world, I could retreat. Railroad, I built. And girls and sports and whatever. But when I went to college and American history, it was really a treat to go back and study the roots of the building of the American railroad system, capitalism, because that was all. And the art class, I was lucky with Ruth Duckworth, who was a very noted Austrian Jewish sculptor, ceramicist, whatever. She had to lead and all of a sudden, material that I taught tell you what to do. She would, why are you doing this? What was your purpose? I'm studying. And at that time, there was a notion in history is study history through the basis of the common person, not, not the general, not the hero, but the ordinary person that's going to work, 12 hours a day and trying. So all that gave me an impetus when I finally got involved in making art to explore American industrial structures, which were more sophisticated. So that's, I remember when and I had a topic, and like Garth said, I researched it. Okay, here's the Rio Grande and Western Railroad in Colorado. Look at the coaling tower. Let me make that ceramic. Because basically, I took 2 weeks in art, so I have no real background in art theory, art history. I could look at pictures. I could see a picture of a soup can. I could see Jackson Pollock. I had to come to my own terms about what I thought art was. And even I reflected back American history. I reflected back the notion of decay and loss, which my parents had as immigrants, as fighters in World War II. And I could create an imagined world for myself. And I also stumbled onto a movement called photorealism. And for the art students out there, this was prevalent in the 70s. It was one material masquerading as another. Mostly it was painters. But so there was a couple sculptors, Marilyn Levine did ceramic hand, doing, faux wood sculptures.
So yeah, we're jumping ahead in time, and that's perfect because Raymond's fascinating and deep, but you didn't identify as an artist. You wind up in New York City surrounded by famous artists, famous musicians.
Yeah.
You were doing handyman work and helping out in various odd jobs, helping to build theater sets. So you had taken up pottery and you were selling functional pottery at craft fairs, but eventually you found your way into this kind of photorealist trompe l'oeil model railroad work. So we've got one of the billboards up right now, and if you'd like to talk a little bit about it.
Well, it's always hard to say. I think I was talking with my wife, Michelin, who's here tonight, and she has a couple pieces in the show that we did as collaboration. And the notion of an artist, there's a couple things. One, the artist reflects back what he knows or what he sees. Another aspect we were talking about is the artist reacts to what he sees or he knows. And in all cases, you imagine something. So growing up in Chicago, all I knew was an industrial landscape. Billboards, old drive-ins, which I went to, factory buildings. So in this period of time, I was, imagining, these structures. They're not models of anything specifically. They're taken from my memory. They're taken from photographs I took. This here actually is from the west side of Manhattan. Manhattan was an island, so they had what they called railroad transfer slips. A freight car, a boxcar, a gondola would be put on a barge, floated across the Hudson River, and come into that pier, and it would have a dock that would go up and down to, locate itself with the tide. So this one actually, I did measure and I did model after a specific place. But it was really a lot of fun because first of all, I could subscribe to Model Railroader and get a tax deduction, which was fabulous. I could learn techniques from people in another field, how to mimic peeling paint with a great one that we used on the drive-ins. And I could just say, okay, I want to depict this. I want to depict that. So my source material was outside of myself. The interior of myself, dealing unconsciously with my parents' loss, was the notion that everything is broken down, everything has seen its better days. It's sort of, we were walking around Syracuse today and it was incredible to see these amazing buildings, which really look like Soho or Tribeca in Manhattan. And now there's a revitalization. The decay is over. People are saying, oh, look at these structures, let's make living lofts. The problem is none of us can afford to live in them, but I know there's people out there that can. So this idea of reflecting, I reflected back America's history and its loss to an audience. And Garth tumbled onto something too. My parents, you have to earn a living, no matter what you do, you make some money to pay the bills. And my parents taught me that very well. So when I came to New York, anyone said, can you install a gas space here? I'd say, of course I can. I'd go out and buy a book and read about how to do gas, buy the tools and do the job. And when I went into art, I didn't know I could sell sculpture by feeling. I also had that was American big seller. And the third was model railroads. People love that. So I tumbled and snuck my way into the art world by luck, by chance. And, I was, grateful for it because I was able to sell this stuff. Use my addiction to American history, to model railroads, to a fantasy. But it changes. Styles go out of fashion. Your dealer doesn't like what you're doing. And then you're out on your feet. And now you're trying to figure out, what can I do? Okay. And that then changed my approach to art.
Right, you're stepping on tons of my lines, Raymond. So I'm going to back up a little bit.
Okay.
We have, students who are just starting out in art school. We have grad students who are about to take, their steps out into the art world. You essentially stumbled into showing with a really amazing New York gallery, which wound up being a bit of a double-edged sword for you. Can you talk a little bit about, I guess, showing with the New York Gallery in the mid to late 1970s and what that was like, and then how you felt it handcuffed you a little bit?
Yeah, I think I've come and talked at a lot of schools. I've done a lot of critiques at schools, and I particularly like graduate students because you're trying to put together a coherent body of work. At this time, I had been making large platters and bowls, selling them at the Rhinebeck wholesale fair. Oh, this is my failure at throwing. Just digress. Since I didn't know how to throw, I threw the interior of the bowl. I turned it up and I trimmed it away to get the shape I wanted. It didn't stand. Okay, so what do? Oh, I said, okay, let me just put a couple posts of clay. So now it stands. So this, and I sold them. I mean, because it was so different. But this evolved years into the bowls, making billboards in the bowls, making fireworks. And that's understanding that clay, small wooden structures in ceramics, nine fired, and it appealed to people. It's probably, and it's not it's gorgeous. I love it. But that's where is greatest. If you don't failure per se, to, and so from that point, I kept enlarging the scale. If I could do it on a bowl that's 6 inches, I could do it on a bowl that's 24, 8 tile. And that's where the memory of model railroads came back. My first big piece was a water tower and a windmill on a 24-inch slab. I was in the wrong marketplace to sell it. I was in a marketplace that valued pottery, valued craft, not sculpture. So with Ivan, the world keeps changing, and it's, there was less people coming out of school with graduate degrees. There were people that were iconoclastic. Ivan had an open door policy. You could walk in to the gallery and he would put your spot and not do that. There is no possible way You need a gallery, know someone to introduce you to the person who could introduce you to the person who made those visuals. Or you want to be an actor with a bag, borrow, steal, do it. No, but I felt really great with it. I looked at him, came over that weekend, and he said, "Okay, kid," because he was an older person. I was young, even though I was 30. I was still a kid. And but I stumbled on the right place because he loved Americana. His you know, hand tools, coring apples, I mean everything. So my experience in no way is pertinent to what you have to face or go through. It was of that time of a particularly unique individual ran his gallery in an open way. Now here's the downside. I didn't know because I was not, he alienated every museum possible. He was responsible for discovering. He was responsible for discovering. He was the of the gallery, which was the premier gallery. So Ivan, he had developed a certain degree, was not conducive to museum curators or people or whatever. So I found this out later through Lucy Lepard. Gallery would ever get a review. Forum Art in America, they didn't like him. He hurt my career as much. He sold my work, but I did not get critical attention. And Maryland, because the West Coast got the critical attention, West Coast. So, you know, it's a give and take. On one hand, this, on one hand, that. Art I didn't know until it was too late. So, you know, but that's okay. You follow a path and you go on to the next step. And I think that's the thing you have to realize as a student. It's a journey. It's a slow train. You do a chapter, you write a chapter, you read a chapter, then that leads you to the next chapter in your story. And then your novel's done. Okay, what am I going to write about next? What am I going to do next? But it's very, very difficult in this day and age to get recognized as an artist. You know, and I'm sure, Garth, how many emails you get every day? You know, wow, you know, I'm a little overwhelmed.
One thing that I wanted to point out that has been interesting about digging into your work, you know, I wanted to point out to all of the students who are out there in particular that art collectors are not a monolith. They're not all, you know, the same you know, art fossil customers that you might imagine. And so Raymond, with your work and OK Harris and the strain of kind of Americana catered to, one of the collectors of your work is a guy named Richard Belger who owns the city, and he bought a major piece from you've doubtlessly encountered strange collectors for your strange work.
Well, there's a couple of things, you know, when you talk about collectors, I've been very lucky. David Berman was another major collector that built shopping centers. Henry Fire was he was not only an art collector, but he was an art speculator. So if he liked an artist, he'd buy 25 pieces of that work. Steel sculptor in the 60s and 70s. So he brought the aspect to, okay, art is a product, you sell it, you package it, but you have to be in the stock market, i.e. showing at a major gallery. But I will say this about the collectors, they were their own people. They had the collectors I met with Bob Ellison, Henry Fywell, David Berman, Richard Belger, Marty Margulies. These were people that made their own business from scratch in real estate, in commerce, and they weren't beholden to a gallery, to a point of view, or to an art consultant, the bane of our existence. Okay. And they knew, but you didn't care what you did, liked it, they bought it. Any collector that asks you, is your work going to be valuable in 10 years? You can't answer that. And then they're not serious about art. You buy art because you like it, because it triggers a memory, because it's something you want to be reminded about. That's what you do. And I think those type of collectors are more and more scarce and rare. We're talking about individuals, most of them have deceased, but they were in an era where people were self-made individuals. You certainly have self-made individuals today in all the tech companies that were built by self-made individuals, but they don't pay attention to art in the same way that an older generation paid attention. Fine art is dying as a medium. I mean, really, we look at movies and you look at the CGI artists and you just like are overwhelmed. I mean, you have an artist that's devoted to developing the eyebrows on a character. One artist, just 300 others that are devoted to the set, the screen, and whatever. And you just start saying, my God, what am I doing? I'm an antique. I'm a dinosaur, and I commiserate with anyone in the fine arts because it's ending up as a tradition or a craft. And how do you bring it into the contemporary world and have it make a difference? You can do it, but it's, very, very hard.
So we're going to take another jump in time. Essentially, your work started to evolve beyond the strict trompe l'oeil work that you were making. Ivan Karp and OK Harris opted not to show that work. So we've got, let's see, here we go.
Well, this is with Alan, yeah.
Yeah, so could you talk very briefly about this work that I would say is somewhat transitory and is getting you to sort of the next main phase of your career?
Well, I was lucky in two levels. One, at the beginning of my career, I met a gentleman named Alan Chasnoff, and Alan was a real estate developer in Long Island, but he also was a dropout from film school. He had also gone to Yale, and he also believed in photography and taking pictures. So, we connected pretty quickly. My father was an amateur photographer, but Alan was doing really beautiful setup photography. His notion was that it's so easy to take a picture as a photograph that it was the obligation of the photographer to photograph material because realism was too easy. So he was taking pictures of paint squeezings. And if you know what a macro lens is, you can make a close-up and you could see the texture of the extruded, coil of paint, the little bubbles, the lines, and he would blow them up to, like 20 by 24, and you had no idea what you were looking at. So Alan and I just started going out taking pictures of industrial areas. He had a car, I didn't, and we would trade back and forth. In '78, we wanted to collect ceramics, and so I was lucky because I became, his advisor. So, we spent a lot of money. We put together a collection. It encompassed, the first piece was the Betty Woodman pillow vase, which was, really remarkable. $278, Garth. So, but he sent me to the West Coast. We bought Richard Shaw. We bought Ron Nagel. We bought Viola Fry, who was hands down the best ceramic artist in the world. Arneson and all the people that they toot, Viola Fry was really something else in terms of her ceramic, her painting, and just the dedication that she devoted to her art. And with Alan, a couple of times he wanted to make ceramic art. So this is a collaboration with Alan, and Alan's big thing was brokenness. As an individual, he felt broken. He didn't like school. He didn't get along in school. He didn't like the structure of school. He didn't like even language, that you were bound by a sentence. You had to be rational and you had to make sense. and he hated business, but business was how he made his money. So the whole notion of working with Alan was to learn to work with broken things, with fractured things, with deformed items, and clay lent itself to it. So this is like 80, yeah, 85. Yeah, and so we were slip casting shapes, common ceramic shapes, breaking them and recombining them. And this then led to a piece that you'll see in the show, which was a bronze piece. So Alan was great because he was like the big brother. He was also a pain in the ass because he was the big brother. And he would always question, what are you doing? You don't know what you're doing. Think about it. Work harder, but it was worthwhile because you need someone to call you on your bullshit. That's all I can say. So Alan was a professional at that. Michelin is a sweet person.
So I'm going to kind of zip through the next body of work, which the next major exhibition that you did revolved around the decay of the steel industry. Here are some pieces that Raymon encountered, all of these surveys of recently laid off steel workers in their own. This is the actual handwriting of the workers, overlaid with images, and these are found images.
Appropriate.
Okay, so you see the text from the worker. This you can probably read the one on the right. Raymond probably has it memorized.
No. Let me go to the mill. Do you have a mill? Yeah. So I forget what year it was. So it was 82 or 83. Basically, I was tired of doing the Americana body of work. So I did a series of reliefs that were 4x8 of battles that America fought that they almost lost. One was Anzio Beach in Italy, one was Tarara in Japan, one was the Kasserine Pass. And I had dead soldiers in these pieces. They were large, they were decayed, they were made in my stick style. And when Ivan saw them, he said, no, I'm not showing them. Now, in my mind, I was offended because I had 5 shows with him, one every year from 79 on. And what do you mean you're not showing my work? We've sold, we've done well, why not? And I had forgotten that being a dealer, you're a store. You're offering items to the consumer. 4x8 reliefs is not something that goes into living room walls or is decorative above your sofa or in your den. It was naive on my part to forget that a gallery is a shop, and you may couch it in art language or art historical terms or whatever, it's still a shop. And the dealer is a curator of taste. And what I had done was not his taste. So I was a little pissed off, and it took me a while to come to that terms. But essentially, I was fired from my gallery and I had no way of making a living. So that was depressing. Because I stay on top of current events, because I see what was going on in my hometown, I'm also realizing that all the steel mills in America are being shut down. Now, I didn't have a wife and a kid. I didn't have a mortgage. I had not lived in the community for 30 years where the whole community is thrown in disarray. When the South Works of US Steel shut down, that was 15,000 jobs that were lost in one neighborhood. That meant that every hardware store, every grocery store, every dry cleaner, the bowling alley, the movie theater, they also shut down because no one could afford to go there. So I started realizing, look, I'm lucky. These people are the ones that got fucked. And there's a lot of reasons. I'm not going to bore you with the history of the steel mills, but we went through a phase of what they would call deindustrialization. And that meant that steel was cheaper to make in Korea, in Japan, in India, in China, and we don't need the steel worker. And this is going on throughout our history. And you can see it with the auto industry. You can see it with the chip industry now that they're talking about the problems with China. We don't make computer chips here. It takes you 6 months to get a car because we don't have the chips. So having that relationship, I began to realize, listen, there's a story here to tell. No one's telling it in an artistic point of view. Let me start photographing the abandoned mills. And so it was a way to get out of New York and get away from the art world. It was a way to forget my hurt, my loss, whatever you want to term it. And I went to Youngstown, I went to Wheeling, West Virginia, the south side of Chicago, Buffalo, New York, and I'd go on these road trips and I would just photograph the mills. And then what I did was I began to realize that I was talking with Errol, the photograph does not represent the place. It's flat, it's neutral. So I started bringing back debris, rusted steel, ground that I put in buckets, pipes, tubes, sheet metal that was rusted, so I could make paintings from these photographs. We don't have any of the paintings here.
We just had that earlier,
Okay.
flat piece, but.
So what it did was I got obsessed with recording the decline of the steel mill, not just in photographs, but also in statistics, how many jobs were lost, the corporate rhetoric of the heads of the steel mill. And so I used my art history background to research it and then to take each aspect of it and display it. And it was called home scrap. Home scrap is the scrap that's generated in the process of making steel. And basically all the steel workers were home scrap. There was no re-education programs. Unemployment runs out after 26 weeks, so you're screwed there. The unions lost their strength. They didn't have funds. And it was interesting in my mind. I devoted, I think, 3 or 4 years to that project. I was lucky it was shown on 57th Street. It opened the day, Friday in 1988 when the stock market collapsed. There was not a collector in the gallery. We've had the thing of coordinating around pandemics or stock market collapses, but it was a great way to make a transition and look at art in a different way. And when I go back to the idea of reflect or react, as an artist, I reacted to what I saw and I wanted to try and educate. And you can't educate people to commercial or economic or political issues in art. You can make a wave, you can make a statement, but it's not going to change the world. So when I was done with the show and it toured it in a couple different locations, I didn't want to keep making what I would call socially active work or political work because it was a futile gesture. The only way you change politics is to work in the political arena, not in the artistic arena. But it was a great way to make a transition from Americana to the real America. And this is what's happening. So the loss is today, was not in the past. And so it was a great transition. That's all I'd say.
So we've got about 15 minutes probably to cover you transitioning into working with ceramics and steel together and eventually inserting glass into it. You had mentioned this bronze piece that you had done with Alan Chazanoff.
Yeah.
Can you talk about this as a stepping stone?
Yeah, I don't know how many here are ceramic students, but one of the processes in ceramics is that it's slow. You put some clay together, you have to let it dry, get firm so you can add more clay. And you can't improvise in ceramics very easily. You can on the wheel to a certain extent if you look at George Orr or even Betty Woodman or the people that will throw and deform their work on the wheel in the moment. But even then it's dangerous because you can lose the whole piece. So Alan again wanted to work in ceramics. So I came up with the idea, well, look, let me bisque a lot of shapes. At that time, I was extruding steel shapes. And so I extruded steel shapes, I deformed them. We had the broken pots. And the idea was we're going to pick a topic. In this case, it was a tertiophrenic head. Alan was beyond schizophrenic. So we had to add another head to this one. And we hot glued the piece together. It took us about 3 hours to assemble the piece. And it was great because you didn't have to worry about the clay. It was bisqued, it was solid. You could draw with the clay, which has been a recurring theme. How can you draw with clay? And so now we have this great piece. I painted it, but it's fragile. The hot glue dissolves it when it gets warm. And so, I said, Alan, why don't we cast it in bronze? And so that's what we did. We went to the Modern Art Foundry in Manhattan, which was a well-known historical foundry. We had molds made. we had lost wax. I assembled the lost wax and then we cast it. And then, I painted it and patinaed it. And thereby I understood how difficult bronze casting is as a process. If you thought ceramic was difficult, no, bronze casting is really difficult. And then the glass blowing is even worse. So that was a short career. We did 4 figures in bronze cast, and but it was great because it was figuring out how to draw. And then this paid off with Michelin. Do you have the Demons and Sirens?
See, they are coming up.
Well, I'll go to the prototype cup first because this was the first thing. Having done the steel project, I was interested in steel. But a lot of steel sculpture is just boring. I mean, Carl Andre, Richard Serra, I mean, I like the monumental effort that they did. I like the scale, but it just didn't have any tactile or hand presence. It was almost anonymous. But I bought steel by the pound in scrap yards in Youngstown, and I had this wire. So I had this idea, which came out of the bronze, is let me start bending steel and let me make a drawing of a cup. And I love cubism because my mother was French, so we would go to the Art Institute. So this piece is not that large. It is in the show, but it was the first attempt to say, okay, I can bend in steel, but now I have the skeleton. Let me humanize the steel. And clay has that facility to be flesh. So I put clay on the piece, and all of a sudden I said, oh my God, I have something here. I don't know quite what I'm going to do with it, but I can use steel as the structure and I can avoid the dilemma of clay, which is weight and gravity. And that was the thing that Ruth Duckworth had taught me. When you look at the work of, let's say, Toshiko Takezuo and Yun Kaneko, their pieces are heavy. They rest on the ground. They don't resist gravity, they embody gravity. Ruth had an ability to use press molds, so her shapes, which were big, like Toshiko's or Kaneko's, floated on these tiny little bases so that it felt uplifted. The clay was going to fly away. And that was something that always stuck in my mind. How do you make a light sculpture? Not a heavy sculpture, a light sculpture, a floating sculpture. And that's what you'll see in the show pretty much, is that struggle to develop that as a process, as an idea, and as a style. So this, okay, here. Now, Michelin taught art in the private school, 4th and 5th grade with her specialty, and she would basically collect sticks. And from the sticks, make, like a folk type of sculpture. They would be portraits of her mother or her father. They would be, feminine forms. And the dilemma in making that type of, we could call it folk art, although she's, trained as an artist and has an MFA, is you have to go and find sticks, which is very hard to do in Manhattan. So it really became limited in how many sculptures could she make and how many sticks could she collect. So I was invited to work at Watershed. And I said to Michelin, look, why don't we go there and work on using steel as the stick? So I would use rebar and I would bend the rebar, I would weld the form. And again, the clay became the flesh on the figure or the skeleton. And Michelin and I were both raised Catholics, obviously raised with the notion of original sin, arranged, all I will be not editorial, all the accoutrements that go along with religion, sin, and all the issues of confession, blah, 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 blah. So we made these figures, we made 12 figures. They were called Demons and Sirens. And every demon was a male figure because men are basically, as Linda Raza said, no good, no good. And the women, we had a mixed bag. We had women as owls or as vultures, because every time someone brings up feminism, all I do is I say Margaret Thatcher, and that ends the whole notion of the value of feminism. So we just picked up, little things. The demon is the demon of defense. He's holding a Bible in his hand and he has a gun on his hip. The public relations is, how corporations masquerade and hide behind a face. And in this case, my nickname for Michelin was always Mickey Ginger. And we use the Mickey Mouse mask as, the mask that corporations hide their true nature, behind. And this became the template for saying, God, I can build large scale sculpture in steel with clay. It doesn't matter if it shrinks or contracts because it adds to the aesthetic. So I am also lucky, since I grew up with decay, since I've lived with loss, it didn't matter that the clay cracked, which is the bane of every ceramic artist. Oh God, it cracked. Oh, the pot won't hold water. Or God, this is no good. I could embrace the crack as part of the aesthetic.
Right, I'm gonna kind of, we have to be so quick about this stuff, but again, come see the exhibition and you'll be able to dig into the content. But you saw Raymond's tendencies as an archivist in the steel series. And Raymond, you started collecting images of people doing labor from corporate histories and things that companies were publishing themselves. And how many of the over 1,000 publications and images that you amassed, they eventually wound up at a university in Japan, correct?
Yeah. I think all of us have a collecting tendency for whatever reason. You can collect Beanie Babies, you can collect baseball cards, you can collect, silverware, you can collect commemorative plates. It doesn't matter. There's something in us that we want to amass, something that triggers an emotion or a feeling in us. So the only issue becomes is, how addicted are you? Garth and I talk about music because we collect music. And in music, I know I'm looking for that thrill of that first sound that just moves you, whatever it may be. It might be Van Morrison, Astral Weeks. It might be Sonny Sherrick, in his free jazz. It doesn't matter. You want to repeat that initial high, so you keep collecting. Being a student of American history and being involved with photography as a photographer, Alan also collected photography. I worked as a gallery assistant, and the first show I put up was a history of the WPA Roy Stryker program of artists that he commissioned to document America. This was people like Dorothea Lange and Walker Evans, and it was stunning to see history made live, by their contemporary photojournalistic history of what the Depression was doing to America. Since I was involved with the steel mills, I started going to the bookstores. When I'm in Pittsburgh, what am I going to do when the light's gone? I'd go to a bookstore, and then I'd pick out on a shelf a book that would say 50 years of US Steel, published in 1954, documenting what US Steel was, is, and will be. And in it were pictures of laborers. Now, you cannot take pictures of laborers in factories. They won't let you in. They're worried about OSHA violations. The only pictures that are ever taken of workers in factories are commissioned by the company itself, or at that time, Life magazine was popular. Margaret Bourke White was invited to shoot in a national paper. So that book was like $2, hardcover. It came with a 33 RPM record, Sounds of the Steel Mill. So I'm like saying, my God, what is this? So all of a sudden, I just start looking. And all these books were like afterthoughts. Who cares about the story of asbestos in 1901, a New York corporation? Who cares about John Deere tractors? I mean, it was just a remarkable amount of imagery that was available of corporate America, and more importantly, the workers. This is Lenox, China. Garth was asking about it. And this was from the anniversary of Lenox, China. And you look and you see what this worker's doing.
He's loading a kiln.
Loading a kiln with the pots on his head. And it probably was hot, because that was what you did. You didn't waste time loading the kiln. You take out, you try and preserve as much heat, run in there, stack it, and go on. This is a picture from Carnegie Steel. again, it's romanticized, but it's a killer picture. So for, I don't know, about 10 years, I collected these books. And like Garth said, I put together 1,200. I was going to publish a book. And in your career, you run up against a lot of interesting issues. So I did a book dummy. I had all the stuff. I went to Princeton University Press. Oh, we love the book. This is great. No one has ever thought of this. No one's ever done anything about it. You just have to get photo clearance. I said, what do you mean photo clearance? I mean, first of all, I'm not using much. I'm just using one picture. That would be a fair usage. No, no, no. You have to go and see and get permission from the corporation. Well, the corporation doesn't exist. Chadwick Wicker Carriage Company doesn't exist. It's gone. Well, you have to do due diligence. You have to go to the library of the town. You have to see if someone has the archives. And I'm looking, and I'm saying, this is a book that's not going to sell. It's going to be remaindered at the Strand. And you're asking me to do 2 or 3 years of investigative work to find out if I can clear a picture. I said, no, no, I'm not going to do that. So I put up a website. I didn't get one complaint. I have pictures from Chrysler, Ford, GE. No one has complained because A, I'm not making any money. It's free. Second of all, I'm taking one picture. And that goes back to music, the sampling, because this is what generated the next body of work, which led to the work I'm doing today. I think one of the greatest things that occurred was hip hop and rap and the use of a sample, which means a fraction or a fragment of a lick, of a drum beat, of a vocal, of a guitar, and looping it and creating a mood, adding another sample. And if you listen to Public Enemy or EPMD, their songs are incredible because they're bringing back the history of music and they're revitalizing in a new way.
All right, I'm gonna grab the mic from you, Raymond, in the interest of moving forward because we have to get to the work that's going to be up in the show. You moved to the Catskills post 9/11 in the early 2000s, so a rural area that used to be frequented by Jewish resort goers. That was the whole economy, farmers, egg farmers. So after the steel mills, the next big documentary project that you did was documenting your neighborhood around the Catskills and all of the infrastructure, the crumbling, let's see, so this is in Brooklyn. Here we go. So I want to encourage everyone to go to elozua.com. You can find links to all of Raymond's websites and research projects, including the Vanishing Catskills project that truly documents the decline of the area in which Raymond lives now. You will see, so there is so much grist for the mill that's in this exhibition. I think, Raymond, you need not only conceptual bases for work that you do, but collecting. You mentioned that to some degree we're all collectors. So tell us very briefly what these wonderful objects are that you could see in the show.
But in my career, I've had a lot of jobs. So one of the jobs I did when I dropped out of college was being a scrap metal man or a junk man. So Richie and I would log. We were doing band work, being roadies and delivering sound systems for bands coming into Chicago. So we would mark down the location of abandoned refrigerators or radiators. And once a week, we would go out and pick up all the material and sell it for scrap and do well. So one day, we're picking up a laundry stove out of a ghetto building. And the burner is not here, but it's in the show. And I picked up this burner and it looked like an African totem sculpture. And I was like stunned. Well, this is gorgeous. So I just kept it, you know, because I mean, I knew a little bit about art. I knew a little bit about the craft of making cast iron objects. And I said, I'll use it in a sculpture. So when I moved to New York, I took that burner with me and I moved into what was called the restaurant district of used equipment. So everywhere there's abandoned stoves, space heaters, French fryers. And, one thing led to the other. What does the burner look like? The most staggering burner is the Jewish star. Because I walked out of my storefront and I found this Jewish star. And I'm like laughing. I'm saying someone really had a sense of humor as a designer to design a stove that had 4 Jewish stars. And I grew up in a Jewish neighborhood, mostly of Holocaust survivors or people that left, but they were all white collar. They owned the Army Navy store, they owned a cosmetic company. I never met a working class or blue collar Jewish person till I came to New York. When I met a Jewish plumber, I was like stunned. Don't you all go to college? I mean, what are you doing as a plumber? And then you go on and go on. So I laugh because I'm sure it had to be a Jewish artisan designed a stove with a Jewish star. And so one thing leads to the other. Now, the thing that I like about collecting what I collect, which is a number of things, you'll see rusty buckets, you'll see rusty enamelware, you'll see gas burners, you'll see washing machine ringers, is that it's all free. I don't have to buy it. I don't have to search on eBay. I don't have to compete with anyone for a rusty bucket. No one sees the value in it. For me, it was like, okay, a bucket is a vessel. I was a potter. So it was interesting to say, okay, look at this. Look at how this has been deformed. One of the buckets is shot through with shotgun pellets, so it was used for target practice. So I have yet to meet anyone that collects gas burners, buckets, enamelware for ringers. I'm hoping to, because then I could trade my extras and build my collection. But we should stop here because this is the most important link to the current work. And this also, when was talking with, it's Errol, my mind is blank, but we're talking about digital. If we come back to the notion of sampling, in 1996, 97, I'm working with computer music, I'm working with Photoshop, and it dawned on me to take apart abstract expressionist painters. So if you take a Lee Krasner painting and in Photoshop you use the select tool and you say, I want red, and you specify a pixel dimension, you select out the red. Now you copy it onto a blank canvas, you have all this red as an abstract shape. So what I did, I took maybe 60 paintings and I separated them. So I would have all the colors in a painting. Jackson Pollock, I might have 6 different sheets. Here's the red, here's the blue, here's the black, here's the white even. And now, what did I do with them? Well, this goes back to the music. Let me put together the red from Krasner. Let me put together the blue from Pollock. And in that, I created my own composition using the sampled paintings of art history. I mean, one of the best ways to get known as an artist is to follow a lineage of fine art that's been accepted and been acknowledged. And you continue the tradition. And that also gives you a pedigree that, people can track. Oh, well, this is that to that to that. So in this abstract expressionist period, that was the idea, was to use our history and make something new out of it. And this is totally sampled. And I was like stunned. I'm coming up with beautiful compositions, beautiful colors. But at the other level, the output of the computer is boring. There's no texture, there's no hand of man, there's no tactility, there's nothing to keep you interested other than the intellectual and the compositional structure of the print. So Michelin and I tried painting them. Michelin was a painter. We had an interesting collaboration where we would, discuss painting. We would paint each a layer. I'd paint a layer and we'd fight back and forth. But the idea was to take the abstract output of the computer and make it tactile. Give it texture, give it body, give it brush strokes, give it a human presence, which the computer does not do. And, and that goes to anything. The appearance of humanity in the Marvel, series or the Batman movies, it's stunning, but it's still plastic. It's still not real when you compare a real, film of real texture, real paint and whatnot. But this was the breakthrough that enabled me to make new sculpture, because in the abstract expressionist period, there was no great sculpture. It was all painting. There was a few sculptors that floated around, but it was not as interesting as the paintings. When I was artist in residence in LSU, then I went the next step. I took 3D Studio Max. I mean, great thing about universities is that they give you access to information, to teachers, to people that can help you in your career. I met a landscape student that taught me how to use 3D Studio Max. And from that, we took the same samples and then we worked and built them and made prints from that. Again, the tactility wasn't there. And then this is the first series of sculptures made from those prints. And you can almost see the layers because there's one sheet after the other sheet after the other sheet.
Yeah, so these are a little bit like a stage set, just layer upon layer of colors floating. And this is, again, clay and steel, correct?
Yeah, because now I had the steel, so it was no big deal to make anything I wanted to make. And some of the sculpture, even though this came from abstract expressionist paintings layered, it ended up as a figurative shape. So this was, fun. I mean, it's called the goat. I always think of Picasso's sculpture with the handlebars and the seat. So these were called digital sculptures. Again, taking the digital print, making it tactile, making it 3D, and making it feel like handmade.
And you can see this as the sort of valedictory sculpture in the first gallery, leading to the your most mature work, I would say, your signature work from the last years. So Raymon, you're using these setups of some of the objects that you collect and some of the ideas that Alan Chazanoff had about photographs posing questions rather than being documents. And I'd invite everybody to think about the textures and the colors in these compositions and the ways that they start to influence the forms that you're making. Can you briefly tell us about the R&D series?
Well, again, it's so interesting to watch your career go by in a half hour. I'm like saying, oh, okay, wait a minute, we skipped this and that. But in this sense, the evolution of working with a computer to generate ideas, taking and utilizing art history, and then transforming it into my own ideas, this was the next extension. I knew 3D Max, I could make 3D sculptures from the samples, but there was an element that was missing. And one day, Michelin and I are in a gallery and we're looking at some glass. And, I said, I think this is cast glass. And this older woman said, no, this is blown glass. I said, how do you know it's blown glass? My son's a glass blower. I said, great, what's his phone number? So I called him up. His name is Lauren Silverman. And Lauren was the technician at Corning Museum, helping artists take their vision and translate it into glass. So I knew what I wanted to do. And I wanted to weld steel shapes and blow the glass in there because I wanted the glass as a juxtaposition to the clay that was decaying or cracked or, flaking off. And Lauren, again, one of the problems about school is they tell you what you can't do. And they don't necessarily encourage experimentation. So Lauren, having a BA in glass from Alfred, wow, you can't blow glass into steel. It's going to stick. The coefficient of expansion is going to cause it to crack. I mean, it was like one thing after the other why I couldn't do it. And, finally I looked at Lauren. I said, Lauren, I'm going to pay you. I don't care. Let's just see what happens. And of course, it worked, much to my surprise. I think the thing that surprised me the most and which added something to my work that I didn't have was when you blew glass into an armature, it expanded like a balloon. So the glass looks live. It looks like it was frozen in a moment of time of expansion, which it was. And that fluidity and that balloon sense, which you can see in the blue one or in the red one on the right, it added a quality of improvisation to my work, which I didn't have. Because as Garth says, I'm not going to say you're saying I'm too conceptual or too controlling, but I am. And I want to, do what I want to do. I want to make it happen the way I want it to happen. And the glass added an element of chance, of unexpected, beauty, of fluidity to the work. And that was like a breakthrough. My God, look at this. And so I was very happy with that because it was like a breakthrough conceptually from just glass. I mean, I had steel and ceramic. Now I could add glass to the recipe, and that broke through into a new body of work.
And they're also growing in scale. Some of these are 3.5, 4 feet tall. And I think as we progress in the R&D series, you're seeing them, 18 feet tall, 25 feet tall. But these are massive objects when you're approaching them in person. Let's see, I think
These
let's
are the
get into the
last
triharmonics.
So again, I'm going to come back to that notion of reflect and react. When I started, making art, which, I didn't really ever call myself an artist. I was making model railroads. I was reflecting back, notions of American history. I was illustrating them. I was showing my thoughts or my feelings about that to the public. Okay, when I started working on this, it became the notion of my interior landscape. Rather than reflect back, what I saw, I decided to reflect what my inner space was or what my craziness was. Because in one sense, I mean, one of the dilemmas we all have is we want to fit in, we want to be liked, we want to be accepted, but it's hard because we also know that we're a little screwed up, because why else would we want to be an artist and try and communicate? If you wanted to just fit in, then don't do anything, don't make any waves, go orange, whatever, it's simpler, So if you start accepting, okay, I really don't quite fit in here, or I feel a little at odds with what society tells me I should do or how I should be, it's a struggle. And you have to start gaining strength to believe in yourself, not to the point of arrogance where what you do is automatically right or best, but it's accepting who you are. So one of the things in this work, I've always been interested in decay, always been interested in loss. I also like color, I also like form, but I began to understand my childhood psychology was that I was defined by those terms, yet in one sense, I'm a sterling example of the pros of immigration. I was able to do things my parents couldn't do because they worked so hard to put me in that position. So I was the hope of my family, and to a certain extent, I've validated their belief in me, although they didn't show it at the time when I'm growing up. So I began to say, well, look, this is interesting. The steel is sort of like my father, the strength, the stability. My mother is much more fragile and emotional. The clay reflects her moods, her break and fractures living through the German occupation. But the glass reflects me. I have a degree of optimism. I have a degree of hope, despite what we face or see in the political arena, the environmental arena. So this work became a great mirror and reflection of me, not something else. So I could mine my interior space rather than mine the world around me. Now, it's been a long struggle. I mean, I started making art in '73. This is 2022. Sometimes I look at it and I say, well, why did I take so long to get here? I have no idea why it took so long, but I'm here and I'm happy I've arrived at this state. And it's almost where I feel, wow, I could retire. I've made this complete cycle from bowls that needed posts to stand up to pieces that reflect who I am. My craziness, my, eclectic taste, my weirdnesses, my collections. but it all stands together and there's beauty in the craziness. And that's what we all have to come to terms with. There is beauty in who you are, no matter how disformed you may think you are or the world thinks you are. There is a beauty and grace, and it's our job to find it and reflect it back to others.
So we started planning this exhibition at the Everson 4 years ago, and it was due to open on September 11th of 2020, and the museum had just opened back to the public after the COVID scare. So we made the decision to push this exhibition back by 2 years. And those 2 years, Raymond, gave you the chance to kind of work in the studio, and you will get to see the culmination of Raymond's time in the studio, wood shedding during the COVID pandemic in these last sculptures. So can you give us just a last sort of glimpse into your thoughts for the Clarity Confusion series?
Well, I always go back to my mother, who was French, and Michelin and I joke because the first word out of her mouth was always no, mais no. That's not it. You're not right. That's not correct. And my mother had an incredible arrogance, which I soon realized came due to the French culture, where you think you know what's best or what's right or how it should be. Obviously, I followed in her footsteps. So I had that same arrogance. And it's a quick judgmental arrogance. It's a quick, I know better than anyone else. And so that clarity, supposed clarity, was what enabled me to go forth and to struggle against the world. As you get older, you realize that that clarity is also a handicap because you really don't know what's right. You don't really know what's best. And in truth, you really are a mass of confused thoughts that you're sorting out, stumbling on, okay, this is what I'm going to believe today. And all of a sudden, a week later, you're thinking, oh, well, this is really what I believe. So your mass of confusion masks the clarity that you're portraying to others. Oh, I'm together. I know what's happening. I know what's going on. No problems, no sweat. So as I started working on these last 4 pieces, I didn't know whether to call it, confusion in clarity, which was the truth of my existence, or clarity in confusion, which is the acceptance of being a mass of different thoughts. I mean, if you think back about, your senior prom or your first grade communion or whatever, you don't remember it clearly. You remember fragments, pieces, fractions of it. And you construct your identity based on these fragments. And in that, you try and create a positive whole that you present to others. So in that sense, this work is the same way. It's a bunch of pieces, of fragments, of little bits and pieces of color, of clay, of steel that together make a statement. And that statement is there can be beauty, there can be elegance in confusion, it can be in clarity. But again, this is who I am. And that acceptance is a relief. So how's that for a closure?
So I think that that's kind of where we have to wrap things up. And I think the proof in the pudding is the work that is upstairs. So please, please, I hope that this piqued your curiosity. And these sculptures have to be seen to be believed. There are 10 major ceramic, steel, and glass sculptures that occupy the largest gallery in the Everson, and they fill them so wonderfully. We've overstepped our time, so we don't have time to take questions, but I invite everybody who has a question. Raymond and I will be here after the exhibition ends. Come to the opening. 6 o'clock tomorrow is the opening for the exhibition. And then you can commune with this exhibition through the end of the year. So I'm excited to invite everyone back to the Everson. And mostly Raymond, I want to thank you for having such good humor about sitting up here on the stage and reflecting back on your work.
Yeah, and if anyone was not happy with this lecture, we'd be very happy to refund your ticket price. Garth has the money.
All right, thank you very much.
Feel free. Whatever, if you want to make a comment, we have no problem. We'll hang out as long as people have questions that they want to ask or answer. We will not look at people's slides. That's your job. Thanks. Okay. Okay.